Welcome, everybody, to the Wellness Crusaders show. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Patty Reese. I am hosting today. And thank you, KMMU, I think I said that right, for having us on their channel. We're very excited to share a wonderful guest today named Jeff Jones. Jeff is a nutritional recovery life coach, a licensed professional counselor, and founder of the Family Addiction Engagement Training. I am so happy to have him here. His website is called thefamilyrecoverysolution.com, and we're going to talk about a grassroots family approach to a new perspective to addiction recovery. I had the pleasure to speak with you yesterday, Jeff, so thank you for being on the show with us today.
Yeah.
And boy, this really hits home for me, and I know for a lot of people, because a lot of us don't know what to do sometimes. And I know even in my instance, and I'm in recovery for almost 20 years, nobody knew what to do with me. You know, I had, and I think I mentioned it to you, but I'll share it on here. I had a very bad intervention. Okay. But nobody knew what to do. My family knew that I needed help. And so they just basically came in and took me away to treatment, which I agreed to. You know, I knew I had a problem, and that's the first step, right?
Right. Yeah.
If the person in active addiction doesn't know they have a problem, and I want you to talk about that a little bit, but when you do know you have a problem, and which I did, I was like, okay, I'm going. But what happened was they didn't take care of my family, my children who were left. So that was still going on while I was trying to be in a treatment center and recovering. And I couldn't let go of who's taking care of my teenagers, you know? So that's an opening, I guess.
The mom's job never ends, right? Yeah. So, I mean, moms are super important in a family, and, you know, maybe not 100% of the time, but generally moms are the ones that hold everything together. And, you know, if mom's not holding things together for herself, like what you're saying in your story, then it's like, it's way more difficult.
Definitely. Oh, for sure. But I'm so, my goodness, I'm going to say we, because the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition, who you're a graduate from there, we are so excited you're doing this work and offering this to our communities, because it is so needed. And I know there's Al-Anon, and people will just say, well, just, go to Al-Anon and just, and, my daughter even was like, I hate Al-Anon. They're not talking about anything, that helps me. Right.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So when you mention Al-Anon, I know Al-Anon. I've been to some Al-Anon meetings, but from what I know about Al-Anon, Al-Anon is great for a specific stage of addiction and for a specific kind of person. And it's generally, after someone has tried and tried and tried multiple things, nothing's working, and they're so frustrated and they're so burned out. And pretty much the Al-Anon message is just detach with love. And that if someone, and granted, there's many different ways for someone to try to do that. It isn't really all that simple, but that's not a long-term solution. That's a short-term solution for someone to try to get space from the chaos to where they can, just kind of manage their own life, manage their own nervous system, and try to have clarity between themselves and their loved one who's struggling. And so what I've done is to, you know, try to really come up with something that takes a lot of the shaming and blaming out, meaning a lot of, the language about addiction,
Mhm.
that we've used for centuries or more, really, is negative and it's shaming.
Mm.
And that doesn't really invite family members to reach out for help if they are thinking they might be shamed or blamed for the problem. So they end up doing the same thing over and over, and
Yes.
it's not working for them. And meanwhile, their body's taking the hit, taking
Yes.
the negative hit,
Oh, no.
and And I mean, Patty, as you mentioned, all the stuff that I learned in the um, classes with Christina and the academy from numerous people, you know, that really started to expand my thinking from just the training I had as a therapist. And a lot of the languaging in my training, and I remember one professor saying, "Oh, you want to work with drunks and junkies," and I'm just like shocked that my professor would use that language, but that's out. That language is out there,
Yes.
and I'm trying to create a space for family communication where that language is noticed as being negative and
Yes.
noticed as reinforcing the whole problem, just making it
Abs
worse.
Oh, goodness, absolutely. It's interesting. Well, I don't even think alcoholics are used now. It's substance use. Am I correct with that? Isn't that what
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's substance use disorder,
Oh, substance use disorder, correct.
and I really don't like that. And then what is it? Research recovery. They have the ad dictionary, and they have all kinds of words in there that are more person centered, you
Okay.
know, to remove a lot of that negative,
Mhm.
shaming kind of energy. So I mean, I grew up in a family with addiction. It was my grandfather. It was very confusing because the addiction wasn't in my family of origin, and my grandfather showered more love and attention upon me than anybody, but my mom hated him.
Mm.
And there was, I mean, as a kid I didn't know it, but there was trauma between them. My mom never spoke about it. She never went for her own healing. She just continued this rigid thinking that
Mm.
he's an evil person. He's bad.
Oh,
And
boy.
you know, she was on the wrong end of the stick with a lot in their relationship. She was a teenager,
Yeah.
and she had to move out of the house for a year. Actually,
Mm.
her church, someone in her church took her in for a year. So something was going on there. We can
Yeah.
get, but I don't know
Yeah.
the specifics.
Right. Yep. Ah, yeah, the trauma that so many are exposed to, right? And then don't know how to come back around and heal that. So, you mentioned when we talked yesterday that, and I'm sure this is probably a moving statistic, but 300 people die every day from addiction.
Well, that's the statistic that I have heard for a year, plus or
Yeah,
minus 300
yeah,
people every
yeah.
day in this country from
Yes.
an from an overdose or addiction related cause.
Okay.
And I was on a podcast just yesterday,
Hmm.
and two guys were interviewing me, and I mentioned that. And so he Googled, like in the world, how many people die annually in the world. I don't remember the number, but I just kind of like,
Yeah.
it was overwhelming,
I
Patty. And
know. I know.
and so the reason why that statistic is important to me is because that is still happening with our system of care, with the way that we think about addiction, talk about addiction, and take action about addiction.
Yeah.
Like
Or
we
try
still,
to keep changing the word instead of just saying, it's addiction.
yeah, and yeah, the whole substance use disorder kind of thing sounds very clinical.
Yes.
And I mean, the language I use is individual in addiction.
Okay.
And if someone wants to, I know AA is, hi, my name's Jeff. I'm, you know, an addict or whatever.
Yeah.
And so if someone wants to call themselves that and they're empowered by that, great. But
Exactly.
it isn't helpful for me or anyone else for me to refer to someone else with that language,
I
because
agree.
it's not empowering for me, and I don't see where it's empowering for them.
I
That's my perspective, and I really want to say that's just my perspective, and I
Mhm.
honor that other
Mhm.
people have other
Yeah.
perspectives.
Well, I so agree with that, and I just want to, you know, hang out here for a minute with the AA stuff just a little bit because it is a program in every country, right? And
Yeah,
it was really hard for me to say that too, right? There was right now when I go in and I'll have 20 years sober on this coming Monday, which is
wow,
which is
wow,
huge, right? And
yeah,
it's a lot of the stuff you're talking about, and we'll get into also the biochemical stuff, which is why I do know I'm the main reason I'm sober today is because I finally repaired my brain. But when I show up at these meetings, I say, I'm Patty, grateful to be sober today. Because I know one of the things in the group is kind of like, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic. They just and people throw in
yeah,
addict too, because it's not just alcohol, it's drug addiction. So but it is one of our archetypes, right? So if I look at it that way and go, okay, I have the addict archetype, I have the
yeah,
Buddha archetype. If you look at it that way, I have the skeptic or whatever. What but I hear you about like people really not want. I know that a lot of people don't show up because they don't want to say that,
right, yeah,
and
yeah.
that bothers me that it
I
has to be that. And I'm like, because there's so many things in the 12-step program that are so helpful to people, to
Yeah,
all of us. I mean, they don't do the biochemical stuff, and you do and we do, which we know is absolutely necessary, but they do the community and the connection and the
oh,
spiritual work, which is phenomenal.
it's awesome,
Hmm.
the sequence that they take people through in the steps for the healing. And
Absolutely.
there's a lot of good support there, and of course I've heard from people that say the opposite, you know um, specifically male female relationships early on. And
Yeah.
you know but it's human connection. It's people
Yes.
that totally get what you're talking about, and they support you, and
Hmm.
it's community
It's
all
community.
around the world. And like I just can't say enough about how good that is. The other
Yes.
side, as you well know, is every meeting has sugar, caffeine, and
Yes.
nicotine,
Well,
and
I have to share this though, because when I remember going to one of my first meetings in New York, As you know, I now live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I remember going in and I was a health coach, still drinking and doing my organic wine stuff, right? But I remember going into the meeting, and meanwhile I'm drinking, and I'm like, oh, they have cookies here, and look at all that candy over there. So, and I'm just like, there for the grace of God go I, right? Because here I am, like going, okay, well, Pat, you're not doing so good either. but but it is true though, because we do know that the sugar is, of course, another drug, and it's that piece of
It
what
well,
they.
Patty, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to when they say, they haven't had any alcohol for the last couple weeks or couple months or
Mhm.
whatever. And I ask, well, so has your sugar intake changed? And then it's like, and a big old story. And I've never heard anyone say no, it hasn't. Never. And I ask that question a fair amount.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we know that still the brain is not in the balanced place that we hope for them, right?
Right.
Um, I took some notes when we talked last, and you said something that really caught my heart. And then I want to kind of go through what you do with your program, because it's really exciting, and I want to share that with our community. But you said something about um, separate addiction from the essence of of the loved one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
can you talk about that a little bit? Because I loved that, and I
yeah.
was like,
So, I mean, one of the things that I kind of start with is letting families, family members, oftentimes it's just one person, oftentimes it's the mom, but whoever I start talking with, letting them know that addiction has its own rules of engagement. And when addiction comes into the home, people orient around addiction's rules. It's that powerful. And it's so easy to, like that one person that has the addiction, to see them as the problem and bad. And it's so it makes for some very
ah,
difficult conversations. And so, what I try to encourage people to do is to say, you know what, the addiction is like an entity. It is
okay.
coming into your loved one and kind of taking over their thinking. So, when you're talking to your loved one, realize that you're talking to addiction, and underneath that, you're talking to the essence of your loved one.
Ah,
So, how can you separate the person from the problem? Which is, from Bill Urey, who wrote a book, 20, 30 years ago, Harvard professor. The book was called Getting to Yes. But like, what I do is just like separate the addiction from the humanness, from the
okay.
essence, from the personhood
I
of
love
that
it.
person, and to try to let families know that they're talking to addiction. So they can't talk to addiction the same way they would talk to, connect, have a heart connection with with their loved one. So it really challenges family members to kind of understand both, and to be fluid, and to be able to maintain the connection and love, but also have, boundaries, and with consequences that they are willing to act on with with addiction. And it's kind of like, I mean, just kind of jumping to conversations could be something, you know, like an invitation to join our family in healing together as a family, And if you're ready to do that, you can do that right now. And
Okay.
and if you're not, you know what? We're still going to love you, and when you are ready, you can join us. So that's like heavy on the invitation to the essence of the loved one. And that's not a black and white comment because there's numerous other things going on with that person. And so it is like being able to address that and make an invitation.
I love
So
that.
it isn't something that, a listener can just go, oh, wow, that's interesting. Maybe I can do that. And what I want to say is, don't put that kind of expectation on yourself that you can do that by yourself, because that's my role.
Yes.
That's what I do. And what we were talking about before with the biochemical healing and the amino
Mhm.
acids, like family members are quite stressed out and they can benefit from, a regular protocol of um, aminos and consistent protein and good food, because then
Yes.
their brain is going to be working better and they are going to have a much better shot at being able to be fluid, you know?
I love that. So let's talk about healing the family because this is part of what you're doing here. So you're getting the family, you're helping them look at their lifestyle and what they're doing so that they can then take us
Yeah,
through that,
yeah.
how it works.
So early on, what I want families to know is that there is a trickle down of mixed messages that have been trickling down for centuries, quite frankly, and mixed messages about addiction. And
Okay.
so what was like the Egyptians thought that shaming a person or flogging them was a cure to addiction. And the Turks, now I read this or I heard
Wow.
a video from
I think I
Claudia.
was flogged in a past life.
The Turks actually believed that pouring molten lead down the throat would cure addiction. And it's like lead poisoning. If it didn't kill them, I mean, and so
Wow.
and more recently, addiction was, like moralistic judgment,
Yeah.
and they're making a bad choice. And then, now it's like a disease. And back in September, in the New York Times, there was an article rethinking addiction as a chronic brain disease. And so it's like they didn't mention the family in the article, but they did mention all the social support systems and the environment that we grow up in. So this whole trickle down is incredibly important because these mixed messages trickle down into the family and they're
Mhm.
left to deal with them, and they
Mhm.
personalize them. And these mixed messages have an impersonal aspect. And if someone, like looking at the family map or genogram, or if they just think about their ancestors, you know um, it's like there were challenges and
Mhm.
strengths they had to deal with those challenges, or coping mechanisms, like
Right.
all the addiction stuff that we know.
Mhm.
So and kids that grow up in that family see these coping mechanisms, whether it's you know drinking or whatever they see. It's normal.
Yes.
They normalize it. They don't know
Yes.
any difference at all. So and that's part of the trickle down. So I
Yes.
really want families to know, this didn't start with you. There are, and when I start talking to people, it is like maybe less than 10% of the people that once I start talking about addiction, they have to tell me a story about someone in their family, quite frankly.
Absolutely. No
And
question.
so it's I mean, I really, my hope is, that it can become more normalized, that families who are on the front lines of this and oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes see this first, that they can get non-shaming information and education and coaching to make change early on. And as you know, it's easier to change the sooner we do this.
No question about that. And thank you for that. So take us through like somebody connecting with you. So someone has a family member that's going through addiction and they find your program and take us through that a little bit
Sure.
on how
Yeah.
that works.
So I've spoken about a number of, excuse me, the beginning components,
Yes.
which is changing the language, separating
Hmm.
the entity of addiction from the essence
Hmm.
of
I love
the
that.
person, and the trickle down and the personal aspect and the impersonal aspect of these dynamics that are in the family. And then once they're able to expand their thinking, see a bigger picture, and start to consider some of these stuff, then it's all of the stuff that I learned in the academy, Patty.
Okay.
Like, and I frame it as enabling health versus
I love
enabling
that.
old patterns that
Yes.
reinforce addiction. So, and enabling health can start in simple ways for family members to be eating a good breakfast and having protein throughout the day, and contacting people like Patty Reese, who's an expert in food here. um, so
Yeah.
it's like the
Yeah.
enabling health piece.
Yes.
And the next piece is really recognizing some of these contributing factors that I frame as trickle down. And
Hmm.
then it's like how we restory some of that trickle down. Because what we think, our thinking creates our reality,
Yes.
and it limits our thinking. Like, a lot of this is pretty basic, but when we're in the throes of chaos in our family, it's hard to access the rational part of our brain. But after they start to restory some of this trickle down, and they can change some of their own thinking, then they are in a much better place to start to change some of their own behaviors. And so part of what I do, I want to be very clear. I encourage family members to change incrementally, a little bit at a time, not just go from this to that, but a little
Yes.
bit at a time. And that could be changing a reaction into a response, noticing, like, when they say this, I automatically do this. And once I
Yes.
notice that pattern, then I have a much better chance to kind of take a pause, whether that's breathing or whether that's saying, you know what, I need to go outside and walk the dog. This conversation's important. I'm going to come back to it. give me 20 minutes. Will that work for you? And that is really important, as opposed to just leaving, abandoning them, kind of thing, you know. But then we get into, there's many new conversations that can happen, but it really takes at least one person in the family who can calm themselves and start to glean some of this information where they can get greater confidence to have new conversations. New conversations could be the whole thing about amino acids and the amino acid therapy chart,
Mhm, mhm.
and hey, I did this for myself, maybe you want to fill this out. Or the alcohol biotype survey by Joan Matthew Larson, hey, I filled this out for myself, maybe you want to fill this out for yourself. The other way that I've seen that
Love
can
that.
be used is family members can fill it out for their loved one because they know their patterns pretty well.
Yeah.
So that can be a new conversation. And so the new perspective of recovery here starts with families making change first. And then
Bingo.
they make change. It's like it can ripple out to everyone in the family. And ideally, and it isn't like I'm guaranteeing that every family can, quote unquote, get their loved one sober. That kind of thinking contributes to this. It contributes to the loved one feeling like, hey, every time I talk to you, you're trying to fix me. You don't accept me by myself, like for who I am, for where I'm at in my life right now. What ends up happening is I'm going to end up resenting you because I feel every time I talk with you, you're going to be trying to change me, and you're going to be trying to tell me that I should do this or that or whatever, as opposed to just accepting me where I'm at least feeling that for a little bit, so that we can have horizontal rapport, and then I can start to trust you.
Okay. There's so many things popping in my head now. So I have a
Yeah,
client that um, is struggling with her family member. And part of what she's saying too is like, I don't want to be around, my daughter when she's drinking. So
right,
I'm putting up boundaries around that. Like,
right,
I don't want to be around her. I don't want to, like she's asking me, like, is that a good thing? And I was like, oh,
yeah,
you probably need to talk with Jeff,
yeah.
so
Well,
helping people figure out boundaries for that when their
yeah,
loved one, is drinking, and or using drugs or whatever, like, you know,
yeah. So, one of the, first thing with boundaries, I ask
yes,
people to think about like internal boundaries.
right.
What do they need to
Okay.
feel safe?
Yes.
And not just in that situation, although
Okay.
I'll circle back to that situation, but what does a person need to feel safe? And I am a big fan of writing things down. And
Okay.
I know many people who I say that to and they never write anything down. But I know when something is written down, and then you're looking at it, and it's on the counter or on your mirror or on, you know, the dashboard of your car, or the wallpaper of your phone or whatever, where you're going to see it regularly. It's a reminder about what a person needs to feel safe. And then I want them to start to advocate for that in their life. But before they do that, I want them to recognize all the different places in their life
Mhm.
where they're not kind of getting their needs met
Mhm.
completely. So
Yeah.
it starts off incrementally, but then it's like if that individual is living in the same house and they
Okay.
are drinking, you
Yeah.
know, there could be communication about when that's okay and when that's not okay. And so I think of
Yeah.
um, a story. It's like a husband and a wife, and the husband, he's in and out of drinking, and the wife says before he goes to work, um, "Honey, I want to make a nice dinner for you, and I want to talk. There's some things we really need to talk about, you know, and it could be about like what we're going to do on vacation or something. Not necessarily just drinking, but I just want to connect with you." So the guy goes off to work. He said he's going to be back at one time. He comes back an hour later. As soon as he walks in, it's like seconds before the wife realizes he's been drinking, and she can say something like, "Wow, I was really looking forward to connecting with you, and when you're drunk, it's just not the same connection for me."
Yeah.
And the food is on the counter. I'm going to go in the back room and read my book. And maybe another time we can have a nice dinner and connect
Yeah.
and
Okay.
just leave it at that. So it's like
Yeah. Don't
them,
engage when it's active like that. Yeah.
yeah, when someone's drunk, that's not the time to, get into a big, "I said this, you said you would do this, then you did, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah. Right.
That's
Right.
not
Right.
the time. It's just, you know, be as calm as possible and remove yourself. And it's like, hey, dinner's on the table. Have
Mhm.
some food. But I'm going in the back room and reading my book. And maybe tomorrow night or whatever, you know, we can connect.
Yeah. I love
and
that.
and
Yeah.
then walk out. You got to
And
walk
walk.
out. You can't
Yeah.
say one thing and then not do it. That's
No.
like, that's in my mind, that happens a lot in the world we live in, and with addiction
Yes.
it happens even more. And
Yes.
I lovingly call it SOTA. SOTDA. Say one thing, do another.
Okay.
And so it's like I've just been aware of that in my life for many years. And I am kind of a stickler for when I say I'm going to do something, I want to do it at that time. Like when I was trying to get on so
on
we could
this
have
on
a
this
conversation, and I'm like, ah.
I know. Yeah. Well, life does throw that in, but at least we're both sober.
Yeah.
So we know it's not that issue.
Yeah,
um,
I could only guess if I wasn't sober, the way that I
oh,
react would be
well,
extreme.
right. And there's two things. I'm on your website, so I want to read something in a minute, but talking
Okay.
about but before I get that to that, I wanted to ask you about, and we talked about this dropping, getting into that um, nervous system, dropping into that nervous system, because nobody can, like when we were trying to get on, right, we can jump into that fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system, the importance of that. of dropping in and being able to communicate with your loved one. Because I think one of the
Yeah.
things I know is true in my own life, with others, when I see them drinking, I just am like, or, I just go into this, so for the person dropping into that relaxed state, into like really
Right.
addressing their nervous system. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways, I have just been surprised that that really hasn't been a part of this whole dynamic.
Yeah.
Because of course there's additional stress in the family,
Hmm.
and our whole addiction recovery system, you know, in my mind, kind of uses that against the family to where they can feel blamed for their reactions when they're in an activated when their nervous system is all stressed
Right.
out.
When they're in a stress response. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what I want to say is, and in some ways this can sound very idealistic, but there's truth to it, is if a person can be aware of that activation in their body, and they can slow themselves down and not just get into an impulsive back and forth argument or something like
Mhm.
that. Like when their nervous system gets activated and they're in chaos, they're going to have impulses come up, and they're going to want to just kind of like let it fly, you know,
Yeah.
and that doesn't help. And so being able to practice over and over, one, to recognize what's going on in one's own body, and
Hmm.
then have techniques or
Hmm.
strategies, things they can do to calm themselves down. And the whole amino acids, I mean, that's one pretty significant leg of the stool that can support that. And, it's going to be very different for someone who has had a meditation practice for the last 15 years than someone who has never meditated at all,
Correct. Right. Yes.
and so I don't want to say this to kind of give the message that it's easy, you know, but what I want to say is if they don't calm themselves down, it's the argument, the communication back and forth is likely not going to go well. I mean, that's just
I agree. No question. No question
so.
about it.
So I mean, I'm thinking of a mom that I worked with several years ago, and I would talk with her on the phone. Like for the first couple months, I would talk to her on a Zoom call or the phone like a couple times a week,
Mm.
and she'd reach out with an email or a text, and she was essentially like her daughter was living in an abandoned house with some friends, and
Mm.
they were doing heroin and fentanyl,
Mm.
and it was in the town she lived in. And
Oh boy.
the one thing that I encouraged her to, well, I brainstormed with her and she did it. She set up a lunch every week on Wednesdays with her daughter.
Oh, wow.
And and so she knew it was going to happen on Wednesday and the next Wednesday and the next Wednesday. And so she had something to practice for. So we did role plays. And I was almost like, so what is she going to say to this? What is she going to say to this? You know? And I play her and she plays her daughter. And we did that a number of times. And I want to be real clear. It wasn't because this woman was not smart. This is not about education. This is not about smarts. This is about the nervous system, and we live in environment that stresses us out. Just the
Yes,
environment. Then add addiction on top of it, it multiplies that stress.
correct.
So um,
Oh,
I I mean, for me to really be helpful, it isn't just giving people a PDF or a video or something like that. But that's like a start because then they get some information and we
mhm,
talk about it
mhm,
and we do that for a little
mhm,
bit. And then
mhm,
it's like practicing new behaviors and then using that practice. And
mm.
she had like 3 different lunches with her daughter, and then she came back to me and she said, "Jeff, I think I'm making progress." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she and what she said is like, "I feel the impulse coming up and I don't try to save her." She's
Oh,
telling me about what her and her friends are doing in this house, and it scares me, but I don't have this quick reaction, and I'm just listening to her. I'm asking questions, and I think she's really starting to trust me. So she said that about 2 weeks later, the police came into that house and she reached out. She trusted her mom enough to call her mom then, and her mom went and got her, and her mom was, just, hey, what about the idea of treatment? And there's a detox place and I've called them, and how about if we just stop by? And after a
oh,
number of no, 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 she's like, well, let's just give it a try. If you don't like it, if it doesn't work for you, you're not going to do it. She stopped by. So it was, it was.
oh,
I mean, Patty, the other part of that story is she had this non-narcotic detox, which is not the norm. And she went from that to sober living. So she jumped residential, and she did that because of a lack of money. And, in that month, I was meeting with her around the whole um, amino acid
oh, yeah,
protocol,
yep,
and she was in this, AA has this term for it, the pink cloud kind of,
yes,
you
yes,
know? She was in that state, and she taught me a lot
mm,
because there's a lot that I could do when she was in that state, and after that month, I passed her to another person that knew that protocol but was not that familiar with my thinking
mhm,
and so I'm constantly learning, Patty.
yes, yes. Well, that is a beautiful, thank you for sharing that. What a beautiful way to, I mean, I'm visualizing this because I have a good friend whose daughter was in a heroin crack house for a long time. She's finally sober now, but these
Wow.
are really helpful tools for parents to go, we can't save them, but we can continue to love them and let them feel safe with us. And then hopefully, because all we want is them not to die, and our
Right.
job is to help save lives, you know
Right.
but we have to start with the family. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I love the idea of you also doing like amino acids with the family members, because they can say, hey, you know what? I have been under so much stress with what's going on with you and me, and I've been doing aminos and I've been changing, and I'm less stressed, and I'm feeling so much better. And maybe you want to try, some theanine, or whatever that
Yeah, I
opening
have
is.
this bottle of L-theanine. I can open a capsule, put it under
Mhm.
my tongue, and
Yeah.
actually, I'm gonna do it right now.
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
wanna try one?
Mhm. I do. Pass it through. Oh, I love that. And I just wanted to read uh, from your website, and then we'll close up in a minute here. But I love what you say here. When and if the individual in addiction decides to consider a new life, they can be introduced to multiple paths that
Right,
can support them to achieve their goal. Incremental progression of options. And that's the baby steps: abstinent based treatment programs and self help groups, alternatives to abstinent based models, which is the biochemical repair, nutrition,
right.
and amino acid coaching. Um, and so this is where we are inviting them to feed themselves. And go ahead. I know you wanted to add something in
Y
there.
Yeah, so the one thing that I could add on to that
Uh huh.
for, and this is really for someone who is in the fire right now, in the
Okay.
throes,
Yeah.
all this, if they offer these multiple things and their loved one says, "No, I can do this by myself. I got this. I'm gonna go to a meeting tomorrow," you know? And then what I really encourage people to do is to say, "Okay, like, when are you gonna go? And are you gonna go once a day, or what's your plan here? What really makes sense?"
Mhm.
And then get them talking about their plan, and
Yeah.
then write it down and
Right.
say, "So in the next week, you said you would do this and this and this.
Mm,
At the end of the week, is it okay with you if I just check in with you as a way to see if your plan is working?" And I want to be really clear. I'm not policing you. I'm just wanting to hold up a mirror, and let's have a real conversation about what you're saying that you will do, and what you're doing. And if what you're doing is working, I support you, but if it isn't, then we need to have more conversation.
I love
I'm
that.
going to be with you and love you through this whole process. Hey, this process, getting into recovery, it's hard for someone who's not in addiction. I'm sure you know this, you
Yes.
know, that it's especially people who have limited funds.
Oh, yeah.
They call this place, they call this place, and they hear, yeah, we have one bed. Then by the time they get there, it's gone, like, this is hard for someone that doesn't have an addiction, and it's not realistic that someone with an addiction can navigate this system very easily. And if they do get into treatment, kudos, prayers.
Correct. I love that. Yes, prayers, of course. But I love also the fact that a lot of people, parents want to just go, okay, let's get him over to this person, let's get him over to that person, let's get him, whereas they're still involved in their lives. So
Right.
I think a lot of people just want to push it off because it's too much for them to handle. But they're still handling it in some capacity because it's their loved
Well,
one.
yeah. And I'm thinking of one family, they got their loved one into treatment, and then they were like, "Oh my god, we need to go to Mexico for a week," you know? And that was their respite,
Yeah,
and
yeah, good.
it's like, I'm not blaming them, but that's kind of the thinking, and they thought their job was done, w when actually it was just beginning, and it was
Oh,
changing. Their quote unquote job description was changing.
yes, indeed. Because I'm sure they thought a lot about their child and treatment in Mexico too, because it's just not something you can push off. I mean, everybody was involved in my healing and recovery, in some capacity. And I certainly didn't want to hurt anybody. I mean, we don't really want to hurt our families. That's not what we're set up to do. But we do have a biochemical imbalance and trauma work that hasn't been addressed, that has to be addressed. So I want to just circle back and then close and honor your time as well. But coming back again to this biochemical, taking a look at, what did you say about the health? What was your term about reconnecting people back to their health stream? Or
Oh, I mean, I just encourage people to enable health
yes,
versus
enable health.
enabling old patterns that
Right,
reinforce
right,
addiction, you
right.
know? And
Yes.
and it isn't their quote unquote fault that they're
Hmm.
enabling old patterns that
Hmm.
reinforce addiction,
Hmm.
because the way the way things have gone for the last 100+ years, you know, results with how we think about addiction right
Right,
now.
right.
And so it really takes us changing how we think about addiction, how we
Hmm.
speak about addiction,
Yeah,
how we communicate,
right.
you know, and
Yeah,
and like it isn't going to change very quickly unless family members can change. And that's why I refer to it as grassroots.
love it.
Be, because family members can change quicker than the whole larger system.
Right. Well, and if family members are being reminded to feed their brain too, right? Because, we know, and a starving brain. I mean, Christine is like, by the way, I do want to mention that we have a conference coming up that anyone listening, Jeff will be a speaker at the conference. It's called feedtherecoveringbrain.com. It's coming up at the end of the month, but you can also you can live stream in and hear all these amazing speakers. But with that, if the brain isn't fed, it's hard to drop into that relaxed nervous system because your brain is on fire. The blood sugar's all over the place. So I often, when I have someone come, and I usually see more people in actually recovery, I'm sending them off with, meat sticks or brain balls or something where they're like, or I'll have nuts out for them. So I'm reminding them simple things: eat protein every 4 hours in the beginning, and that's just something we can, the family members that you're working with can do. And then they can pass that along because they're like, oh, I'm more relaxed to actually talk to my loved one now
Right.
because my brain
Yeah.
is fed. So,
Yeah.
well, Jeff, thank you so much. I want to just remind everybody again, it's Jeff Jones, and it's the familyrecoverysolution.com. You can find out more about his program at that website. Again, the familyrecoverysolution.com. And Jeff, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you at the conference at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, thank you for the work you're doing. And the families, thank you too.
Well, and thank you for having me on this show, and very good to see you. I look forward to seeing you, and onward.
Onward we go. So thank you, Jeff, for helping save more lives.